Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Financial Thought Exchange from the CFA Institute Research Foundation. Our guest today is Mark Mills, a man of many talents and activities. I described them earlier, but I'll go over it quickly. A physicist, an expert on energy, and author of a book on data and data centers, and a tech pundit, according to his one of his websites, and uh, works at the City Journal, where he just wrote a great article on energy transitions and why there aren't any. I refer to the first half of the program for that. It's really an interesting talk. Now we're going to talk about technology, the kind of the other face of the coin that Mark works on. Uh, Mark, you said when I heard you talk about technology that we're really misunderstanding AI.
Yeah.
It's full of hype. The hype is right, but it's right for the wrong reasons. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think by and large, although we'll apologize for the dog if you can hear it barking in the background. I'm sorry for that. But
Quite all right.
the so I I wrote about this just before ChatGPT became a word in common lexicon. About 6 months before ChatGPT was released, my book, The Cloud Revolution, was published.
Mhm.
And in the book, The Cloud Revolution, I write about data and AI. In fact, about the last third of the book is only about AI. So it's not as if AI is a new thing. We've known about artificial intelligence for quite a long time.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, as you know, the uh, the word was concocted 70 years ago uh, by Professor McCarthy at Dartmouth, who's still with us, thank
Mhm.
God. And
Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
I believe he's got God willing, something hasn't happened in the last few weeks or months. He's And he was trying to be provocative when he got all the computer scientists together. I think it was in 57. I should know the exact date. It was a gathering, and he sent out as a notional idea for the gathering to talk about the future of computing and the idea of artificial intelligence, because Turing and the others of that era were already talking about the idea of computers gaining greater power, moving towards what we might call intelligence or doing intelligent tasks. It took a
Yeah, well,
long time.
Alan Turing, who lived a long time ago,
Yes.
designed a test for whether you're talking to a computer or a person, and if the computer, if you couldn't tell the difference, I guess, that
Right.
then the computer had achieved something that we might today call artificial intelligence. I don't know if he did then, but
Well, he did. He called it that. He talked about it and the Turing test. And of course,
that's
the Turing test,
75 or 80 years ago. That's
yeah,
right.
exactly. And the Turing test is actually easy to pass, and computers passed it a long time ago.
Mhm.
If the test is that you use a screen and you're behind a screen, you can't tell if you're talking to a computer or a human for certain kinds of interactions. But in essence, this is where I think it's important to have a sort of a framing with the language. Computing, and I'm being simplistic, computing is about literally computing. The first computers were people doing with pencil and sheets. They were called computers,
Right.
right? And they did accounting and calculations for science and for banks. And computers do calculations. One plus one is two. There's only one answer in a calculation. In computation, there's just an answer. And you can make fancy software to take advantage of computational speed, but it's essentially about computation. Artificial intelligence uses computing, but the kinds of chips and logic that's being used are inference. Inference is different than a calculation, and put in the simplest terms, in many cases, not in counting, and and certainly not in in building airplanes. You don't need a precise answer. You want to be about right. One plus one doesn't have to be two, it has to be close to two. Navigating an airplane doesn't have to be done with an exact answer, it has to be close. And now the closeness depends on the application. Obviously, how close you are in the lane driving a car doesn't have to be like a railroad track. You could be plus or minus, call it 2 feet. So the difference between a computer that does computation and inference would be the railroad track holding you precisely, and of course you being about right. Why does that matter? Because most of what we do in life, it doesn't have to be exact. Most of what we do in life is inferential. Is that likely to happen? Does that look like a cat? Would I probably like to buy this next or that? Would if I went on this kind of flight, would I probably like to stay at this kind of hotel? These are inferences, right?
Right.
And so the
That's how
math,
people think. It's how animals think.
exactly. We
But,
don't.
but it's not how a transistor thinks.
Right. A logic chip that is a transistor that's on off, that's binary, it calculates is not. So humans can emulate computers, but computers have had a hard time emulating humans,
Right.
which is hence the nomenclature artificial intelligence. And they've now what it took to make possible was the right math, which is Hinton himself, who got the Nobel Prize
Hmm.
uh, for this, concocted the math back. I think it was just before the turn of the century, right around the late 90s, if I remember correctly. The problem was the math was so difficult to run on conventional compute that was essentially not useful.
Right.
And along comes GPUs, graphics processing units, which don't do computation. They manage images. Well, images are much more like inference, of course, than calculation.
Yeah.
Hence, the GPUs are repurposed, and hence the takeoff NVIDIA of being, they invented the tool for AI, not for AI, but for inference for a different purpose, gaming, playing
And
video.
wait a second. I've been told, I hope it's correct because I've repeated it, that underneath the layer of a GPU inferential chip
Yeah.
is a group of transistors that are either on or off, and they're operating in the conventional
Oh, yeah, well, that's true.
Boolean
Yeah.
way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we've as human inventors, we've found a way to take this discrete on or off technology and make it into something
Right.
that's much more general.
Exactly. So what you do is you don't want the transistor to operate on binary math. You want it to do a different kind of math. So the
Yeah.
problem is not the machine, it's the math applied to the machine, the
What
software.
you tell it to do. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course, that requires a lot of very different structures and architecture, how the machine runs. But yeah, it's still silicon. There's still transistors on it. So the GPU can be measured in transistor count the same way a CPU can be measured in transistor count. You still need memory and CPUs to run GPUs. So when
Mhm.
you see the so-called card for a GPU, it's actually something the size of a kitchen drawer that often has 3 to 8 GPU chips and another dozen CPUs and all kinds of memory chips and communications chips. It's a complex machine, arguably the most complex machines that humans have ever concocted or built at scale. I mean, it's really something. But back to the hype. If you make a general purpose technology that can do computation, it's a big deal. Everybody computing was a big deal. It took off after the 60s and the dawn of cheap computing, which is the mainframe era.
Right.
Once you make inference cheap and easy to use, it's as big a deal, obviously. I mean, as soon as you just frame it in those terms, but why it's a bigger deal is answered in terms of the what the marketers look at in terms of penetration of digital and information technologies into markets. So roughly speaking, about 20% of our economy is quote digitalized. That is dependent on uses or amplifies computational machines to make the product or machine work or work better. 80% of our economy has its back office, the finance office is digitalized, but the actual operations, whether it's backhoes digging things, manufacturing things, services, front desk, all the things that we do for 80% of our economy are deeply unautomated, undigitalized, because the tool you need to do that has to be inferential.
Right. And so it's easy. It's better done by people.
Exactly. And if you want the person to be amplified, that is, they want to do better, the thing has to emulate the person, whether it's a physical robot, it'll
Yeah.
have to be anthropomorphic and operate beside me and emulate and amplify me. In other words, it has to adapt to me, not me to it. And that's true if it's a piece of software. I mean, we all have the same experience of if all the work you have to do to figure out how to ask a computer a question used to be really hard. You have to phrase it exactly. It used to be you have to type code. Now, then it became, you could type a question into Google. But
Yeah.
even then, you have to become kind of an artist to figure out how to ask Google the right question.
Get a reasonable answer. Yeah, that's
But
right.
but now, yeah, we also know that it's much easier because the AI is much more semantic and it's inferential. It's not perfect yet. It's getting better fast, but it's self-evidently a lot better. But that is just one tiny application of AI, as we know. And we're worried about AI, you know, uh, either going rogue, which is sort of silly.
Or taking over all of our jobs.
Yeah, but this is one of the oldest hoary arguments about automation. AI is, as you said at the outset, fundamentally another form of automation, but it's a very big deal as a form of automation. And it is very disruptive. Doesn't mean there aren't dislocations, but taking over all jobs. You remember, Larry, I put in my book this fact that I forgot who, I might have been David O'Toole that did this at MIT, the economist, where I got the number. 60% of the kinds of jobs that existed in 2020 by categories of jobs didn't exist, are jobs, let me rephrase this, 60% of the jobs in 1964 don't exist in 2024.
Right.
60% of the jobs are gone. They don't exist as categories of jobs. Nobody does them anymore. So 60% of all the kind of jobs that people had in the 60s are gone. And
Yet,
yet,
yet the number of people employed is a large multiple of what it
exactly.
was in the
In,
60s.
in absolute terms, and of course in relative terms, in terms of unemployment.
Yeah,
So,
that was about the same. About
yeah,
4%
yeah,
unemployed.
exactly.
Yeah,
Well, if we're at full
of
employment,
a much larger population. Yeah,
so the argument
at a
can be
much higher wage rate.
a much higher wage rate in absolute and relative terms.
Yeah,
But there are dislocations along the way.
yeah. Not everybody got a big raise.
No, and not everybody during the actual dislocation did well. This is why we create safety nets and unemployment insurance and retraining.
Right.
But people are saying today, the most infamous phrase of all time, this time it's different. Because, but here's what is different. Most automation of the latter half of the 20th century automated the kind of jobs that chattering classes didn't care about.
Right.
Now it's automating the jobs that chattering classes care about, and now they're worried, and they have a right to be worried. I mean, because a lot of the jobs that they have today, just like last time, 60% of those will evaporate, and
Mhm.
and the dislocations. And I'm not trying to make light of people who lose their job. I've lost jobs many times in my life. Uh, it's discommoding. It's damaging to society if it happens too fast. All these things require
Right.
care, but it doesn't mean all the jobs are going away. We're going to have people, robots doing everything. Silly.
Well, I have a question. I will get to trade, but I want to make it last so that there's a natural stop to that part of the conversation. We're in the middle of a number of different tech revolutions:
Yeah.
agritech, AI and robotics, biotech and genomics,
Hmm.
energy and the environment, material science, space. You might add fintech and edtech, although kind of I think they're kind of minor, but maybe you don't. Uh, how much change can we experience all at once and stay together as a society? And is this going to make us much richer? Because that generally, when you've brought in a revolutionary technology, although there's a lot of disruption and not everybody wins, and as you said, we
Yeah.
need a safety net and so forth,
Yeah.
that we've come out much better off than we were before.
Yeah.
And but this is a lot of change all at once. All of it is real. None of the technological revolutions that I mentioned are pie in the sky ideas. They're all being well funded. We're consuming the products already. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I think, and this again, promoting my book, I think
Oh,
that we,
you
we
should. You
I
should.
know, I think we're at a pivot in history. Pivots in history happen episodically. They don't really happen in fixed cycles as people. Cycles don't have to be fixed. And it's because technology revolutions, they have this efflorescence and change things. and then they grow, and then they go through an interregnum period where they're absorbed into society, and they get better and get more widely used, whatever the technology class of technologies are. But there aren't new things. I mean, they aren't fundamentally, they're just better than the previous thing.
That's kind of
And,
where we are with oil.
well,
We get better every
yeah,
year.
yeah,
Cars get a little better,
yeah,
but they're
exactly.
not radically better.
No, they've been getting better and they're still getting better every
Yeah,
single year,
right.
and by every measure, safety, efficiency, all these things.
Yeah,
But the car is still a car. And in some cases, the thing that you've invented is essentially a one-time invention. By that I mean, once you invent the wheel, the the wheel
we've
is
got a wheel.
useful
Yeah, right. Yes.
forever.
Now you're just figuring out different ways to use a wheel.
Better rubber, better tires, longer,
Right.
whatever. But a wheel is a wheel. This is true of glass. Glass has changed profoundly since prehistoric times, practically,
Yeah,
well, prehistoric, early
right.
glass. But glass has extraordinary utility. It's never being replaced. So there are things that never get replaced, you just get better. There are things that we replace, displace. There are real transitions in technology. People don't use a horse and buggy, obviously, except for entertainment. But
Right.
what's going on now is I think we're at a combination, to your point where you started, of technological revolutions that in combination, happening contemporaneously, are as profound as the 1920s, where we had the last time, and there's a number of times in history, maybe arguably 4 or 5 times in our known history, where there have been contemporaneous, profound changes in underlying technologies, and contemporaneous and somewhat unrelated. That is, you have,
Contemporaneous with each other, multiple
right,
threads. Yeah, in the 1920s was a great example. What are we?
right,
I
boy,
mean, these were earlier. They really only flourished in the 20s, but we got cars, airplanes, electrical appliances that
right,
worked
electricity,
everywhere, and
pharmaceuticals and polymers and chemicals in
pharmaceuticals and
1920s.
polymers.
And
I placed pharmaceuticals a little later because the first person whose life was saved by penicillin was, I believe, 1941.
yeah, but they were making aspirin and in 1920.
Yeah, that's true.
So the development of chemistry. So the point of the pivot is not that of when did you get penicillin and antibiotics, but when did you have the technological capability at scale to do something phenomenologically different?
Yeah.
Manipulating chemicals with science and engineering began to take off in the 20s. The ideas were hatched 40 years earlier, but they took off in the 20s. The other one you missed, of course, is communications. The 20s is when we had the efflorescence of both radio and telephony. So we changed
Yeah.
the three spheres that I frame are sort of simpler, and all the ones you described fit in the same three buckets. It's communications, it's it's the machines themselves, which all whatever the class of machines is, manufacturing machines, transportation machines, energy machines, and of course information machines.
Yeah.
Those matter. But back to the point you're asking, are we at somewhere? Yes, we're at somewhere profoundly different because the three magisteria are undergoing contemporaneous revolutions in materials and material sciences, in our class of machines that we can build, from autonomous machines to things, the 3D printers that are finally becoming useful, to atomic production of machines, to next class of nuclear energy. I mean, all kinds of machine changes and materials, by the way, that are self-healing and self-replicating. These are remarkable phenomenologies. And of course, underlying it all, the sort of the glue, I think, is that the information revolution, what we're on the cusp of, which is the cloud and AI in combination creates a utility function that democratizes the power of inference, that at scales that are never before imaginable, which influence everything else. So it doesn't matter.
And
Sure.
let me go back to the three magisteria because I believe you're talking about that the entire universe consists of matter,
Yep.
energy,
And
and
information.
information about the
Yep.
matter and the energy. Those
Exactly.
are the magisteria. Is that
That's it. That's all
okay?
there is. That's the whole world. Nothing exists.
That's the
That
universe, not just the world.
Yeah, exactly. But when we think about how society functions, we have materials, right? I mean, that's and we have the machines, and we have the information about the two things, and the information, and there's a symbiotic loop amongst those things. But
Yeah.
advances in each of them typically occur somewhat independently. For example, Henry Ford in the car he had nothing to do with Alexander Graham Bell, but they both had efflorescence at the same time, and none of them had anything to do with the chemical industry, which began in Germany in the 1890s.
Right.
But Henry Ford needed the chemical industry to make butyl rubber, and they needed that to make the distillation process for gasoline and fuel oil. And they train wouldn't function without telegraphy because of the trains went across time zones. The fact they all happen simultaneously is a philosophical and theological quirk of history.
But it keeps happening. So there has to be a force in human life
Yep,
that causes these efflorescences to kind of happen around the same time and then begin to interact with each other, like you said about telegraphy and a railroad. Uh,
yep,
it's we had an industrial revolution a century earlier where the exact same thing happened with
exactly.
trains and steam engines and so
Well,
forth.
that was the revolutions there were the same character.
Yeah.
Telegraphy began there, but steel, to be able to make stainless steel was the key to the efflorescence of that industrial revolution.
Mhm.
You could not have done it without stainless steel, right? You needed high strength steels to make engines and boilers and tracks and all these kinds of
Right.
things.
Yeah.
And, but you're right. So you can actually trace one of the other ones much earlier. The Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages weren't. We
Yeah.
had the same kind of efflorescence of contemporaneous technology revolutions, and it was a huge boom in wealth at that time, and the population boomed, all kinds of things. Of course, when you say all these, when I say these things, people accuse you of being a Pollyanna, like this solves all problems. We've had a lot of wars over those centuries. We'll continue to have wars. People could keep
Yeah.
doing stupid things. But your question was, does it matter? Will we get richer? So the answer is yes. But I can frame how much richer people will get in this way. Take the two. We'll do it 1 century time spans. We'll do
Sure.
1820 to 1920, 1920 to 20, or 1800, 1900, 2000. Let's just say. So if you look at the United States in 1800, in today's dollars, the per capita wealth of the country was $2,000 per capita.
That's right.
Today's dollars. 100 years later, it was $5,000 per capita. So what changed in that 100 years? Well, from 1800 to 1900, that was the first industrial revolution. Obviously, the
Right.
laws didn't change, the country didn't change, its resources didn't change. It was still the United States of America. Yet per capita wealth, never not gross wealth, the capita went up almost threefold. I mean, it's crazy. But
Yeah.
from 1900 to 2000, the per capita wealth went from $5,000 to $60,000.
Yeah.
What happened? Well, we know the answer. It was the 1920s combination that drove the big long boom. So here we are at a per capita wealth circa 2025 in the same dollar terms of about $70,000 per capita in the United States, 75.
Yeah.
Given what's going on now, it is just essentially dead certain, unless the sun blows up or the moon collapses on the earth, that per capita wealth a century from now will be more like $700,000 in today's dollars per capita a century from now. We're on the biggest efflorescence and wealth expansion in human history.
Well,
Because
even if it's two hundred
productivity.
thousand dollars, that's a lot
Well, sure,
in absolute terms. If
of
you
course.
told Thomas Jefferson, who lived at a time when the number was around 3,000, that it someday would be 70,000, he would have said, "Well, all problems are solved." They're not.
Well, well, he was a little. This is why people. He's a little naive in thinking, but he was right about this, and I think he was probably knew this. I don't know. Many of the problems that we have are solved by wealth abundance in the sense that people aren't fighting each other over do you use money for a safety net versus my own food. If you're wealthy enough, you afford things like healthcare, environmental protection, more education, helping other people, because that's what the wealth effect does on average for people of basic moral standards. So it doesn't solve all problems. People will still fight each other, and the distribution of wealth is asymmetric because humans are humans. It's what we're not. We've always had the same passions and tendencies to all the kinds of sins we all know about from
Yeah.
history.
Human nature doesn't change that
No,
fast.
that's why
Technology kind of weaves around it.
yeah.
If you want to learn about human nature, you can read Shakespeare, who's been dead for 400
Read
years.
read the Greeks? It's the same from
I do, but I find that Shakespeare, I knew more about it.
uh,
Some great professor once said that the Greeks drew human nature in black and white, and then Shakespeare did it again in color.
that's probably true. Although I know some literature majors, much my wife is one, would dispute some of the Greek. The Odyssey is a
Oh, the Odyssey is an amazing piece of
pretty nuanced a piece of human nature, isn't it?
it is. I
So,
meant more the classic Greek dramatists
oh
who
yeah, well they did very, but I think it's not crazy. In fact, I think it's again, I'm convinced it's a dead certain that the kind of productivity amplification that we now have through the general purpose technology of AI democratized in the cloud, added to the revolution in materials and other new classes of machines, will bring the kind of productivity. This is all about productivity. A productivity boom greater than we got so far, the reason we know it's greater than is back to the statistical fact I said earlier. If 80% of our economy is essentially unautomated, undigitalized, but the 20% that got digitalized did better. The unautomated, undigitalized part is healthcare, for example. The back office is digitalized, but the healthcare itself is still very primitive by the standards we'd all like.
you have to poke and you have to look in somebody's eyes and ears.
A
That's
lot,
not going to change completely, but
oh,
it is changing.
it's not going to change completely. It'll get better because if you have better, again, the machines, the tools, the imaging
Yeah.
machines and tools gather better information looking at you, and the AI interprets it better and talk and communicates with the physician, not instead of, you now have the best combination. I mean, the best example of why humans and computers work well together was when Kasparov did that famous chess match where he
Yeah.
let people pair off any way they wanted, human to human, human to computer, or computer and human versus computer, computer and human. The winning combination that was overwhelmingly superior was human plus computer competing with any other the other combinations.
I read that. I don't know enough about chess to really understand it, but intuitively it sounds right. You've got two different kinds of biology, cell biology and transistor biology, and
Right.
if they are somehow cooperating instead of trying to hurt each other, they're going to accomplish a lot. And I think
Yep.
that this would be a good time if you have any final thoughts to say them. We've got another minute or two.
Well,
I
let me bring it back to a current subject. Our
Please.
manufacturing trade deficit in the United States right
In
now is
that case, take 3 minutes.
yeah. So the manufactured products dominate our trade deficit, not fuels, not food, not services. We surplus in services, and we have a surplus in financial products.
Right.
But we have a huge trade deficit in manufacturing. We are told frequently that get over it. We're post-manufacturing, post-industrial. The jobs mostly went away because of automation. Okay, so there's just two things that we need to know. One is that it's not true. The manufacturing productivity flatlined 12 years ago. So if you take 20 years, the manufacturing productivity, it's automation, improved steadily, like it has been, by the way, for a century. And you would expect fewer jobs to do the same work and fewer jobs to do even more work until it flatlined. So you can't say the jobs went away because of automation in the last decade. They went away because of regulators, not robots. The biggest change in the last 10 to 15 years has been the tsunami of regulations in the manufacturing sector, specifically OSHA and EPA regulations. A very good
Those
measure.
are 50 or 60-year-old laws. Apparently, they keep growing like a fungus.
It's worse than growing like a fungus. It's like a virus that invades. It's like a tumor invading your body and slowing it down and making it. Here's how you can measure the effect of that virus, that tumor. And National Association of Manufacturers issues, I think, every 2 years a study of the regulatory cost for small and large manufacturers. Allocated as what does it cost per employee for regulations. For small manufacturers, it's about $50,000 per year per employee to accommodate regulations. For big manufacturers, it's only 30,000. So what you can say here, first of all, is that manufacturing is largely a small business.
Yeah,
Most manufacturing is done by small firms. So what you have here is not that labor wages are too expensive here. They aren't. It's
it's
the
the
cost
overhead.
of labor, the
Yeah.
cost of, which is a regulatory cost.
Does
Fix
that
that.
include the legal costs? Because we keep hearing about how lawyers and human resources executives are making it impossible to hire anybody because then you can't fire them.
Well, that's
They get
also
sued and they
well, that's that you can allocate that to the same thing because if you
okay.
can fire them, but it has a cost. You have to pay out bigger settlements, you have more lawyers. So all that overhead means that what you've essentially done, just roughly speaking, is double the cost of the to the manufacturer of the laborer. And the person that got that money is not the laborer, but the hangers on that have made and the government and all the apparatchiks that go into the system. So that can be fixed by the famous stroke of a pen. That is fixable. It's hard, but it's fixable. We'll see how
Well,
Trump does on that and
we
Congress.
got OSHA and EPA
Yep.
from Richard Nixon, but it had been in the wind for a long time. That basically the environment was pretty dirty, and now it's pretty clean.
Sure. And it was also
I'm not
pretty
against environmental regulation in principle. It's just gone crazy. And
exactly.
I don't know as much about safety regulation, but it feels to me like we're in a regime of safetyism where you can't do anything because you might get
Right.
hurt. How did we get from something sensible and needed to this destructive regime, and how do we go back? And when we're done
Right.
with that, I'm going to have to call it a day here.
Well, the short answer is you frame it this way. If we look back, say, 12 or 15 years, was it the case that manufacturing was super dangerous and super dirty in America? So why can't we just go back to that regime? That would be my first. And the answer is because of the proliferation, expansion of all these regulations, the elasticity of the laws. Can it be fixed? Sure. Will it be fixed easily? No. It's going to take a battering ram, whether this president succeeds with the Congress. He's going to need congressional backstop to reform these laws. I'll say one other thing real quickly. Here's the other fact you need to know about could we get these jobs back in America? If you fix the regulatory part, you don't need to subsidize. You don't need to do much else. You don't need tariffs. It makes it cheaper to do manufacturing here, and you'll get it back. It'll naturally be here because manufacturers want to build here. The other part is, oh well,
If they're kind of high tech, I don't think that the Cambodian sock industry is
well,
going to relocate in Cleveland.
of course not. They might. Don't
They
discount
might,
that
right? Yeah, right.
because the most valuable part of the Vietnamese garment industry is that they have better automation machines than a lot of the garment industry
I know.
here
We
now.
underestimate the level of technology and
It,
development of
there,
countries that we
there is a
think
lot.
of as not so developed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I like you, I'm not proposing by this, narrative that we want all manufacturing back and that they won't do better than us and make socks or computer chips of many kinds better than us and we'll buy them from them or and that we shouldn't buy them from. I'm not saying that. I said if you want the markets to be able to have more manufacturing, you got to get out of the way. And we are the enemy, the old pogo line. I've
Yeah,
seen the enemy and it's
it's
us.
us, right? Yeah.
But the other rejoinder that you hear constantly is that, well, it's silly, Mills. Don't worry about it. There's not going to be jobs. These guys you're not going to get jobs. The robots are going to do it because there aren't enough laborers anymore. We don't have enough skilled labor. And so between the absence of skilled labor, it's not going to come here. And because robots will do it anyway, not going to come here. It completely misunderstands how robots operate and where they operate. So last factoid to have in your head or one's head is that in automation of the factories of the United States, roughly 90% of all robots are in 10% of the companies.
Mhm.
90% of the manufacturing firms have no automation, no robots. Or put differently, if you know, in manufacturing world, about 10% of the big companies produce half of goods, but the rest of it's produced in the 90% where the robots are not good enough. They're too expensive, too clunky. They can only do high volume stuff. They're really difficult, low volume, high skill tasks. Can't be done yet. But the new class of robots, because of AI, are on the cusp of doing that. If you marry that to the skilled labor we do have, apprenticeships have tripled in the last decade. People have figured it out that there are jobs there that pay well with low debts. You marry the available labor with real automation that's useful, flexible, AI driven, you do get a manufacturing efflorescence. Our labor costs then match the world, but we have high skilled labor, high paid labor. I think we get a manufacturing renaissance. I said this 10 years ago. I've said it 5 years. I'm saying now I'm even more bullish on it. But the trick is to get the hell out of the way and not cause the markets to have to grind through begging for subsidies, stopping tariffs. I mean, stop taxing them to death, stop regulating them to death. You'll get what you want in the modern technology.
Well, that's certainly what I believe at the 30,000 foot level. And someday when we have more time, let's talk about what's stopping it. I believe that what people incentives explain most things
Yep.
about human behavior. And
Yeah.
so the reason that we don't have this renaissance quite yet is because it's in somebody's interest not to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is human proclivities for kleptocracy and disadvantaging your competitor are wired into our nature
And
too.
rent seeking, simply
Rent seeking.
taking advantage of the situation you happen to
Sure.
have
Yeah.
found yourself
Yeah. I'm same page. That's a whole separate week of discussion of
in. Yeah.
fixing human nature.
Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, have this conversation. It's one of my favorite topics, as you know, both of us have written about it. I think that you put more focus on the issues we talked about today, whereas I've tried to generalize it into the future of humanity, which may be why you sell more books. But I'm going to keep working on it
You
and
should.
try
You did a
to
great job.
catch
Thank you,
up.
Larry.
Thank you again, and thank you for watching Financial Thought Exchange from the CFA Institute Research Foundation. We will have more exciting guests in the future. Bye-bye.
For more information, please visit rpc.cfainstitute.org/research-foundation.